From Nimrod and Semiramis arose the practices of occultism and idol worship. The words Eber and Hebrew originate from the same root. This is where the origin of the designation Hebrew for Abraham and his descendants lies. Nimrod. Also known as Namrud in Hebrew, Nimrod was the first great king mentioned in the Bible. He ruled over a region that included the lands of Assyria and Babylon. Legendary tales depict him as a mighty hunter, Genesis 10-9, and the initiator of the construction of the Tower of Babel.
And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Accad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Genesis 10-8-10.
According to Genesis 10-10, Nimrod laid the foundation for the city of Babel as its capital. However, Babylonian religious tradition attributes the city's foundation to the god Marduk. There are no other records of the establishment and construction of the city. Babel was one of the significant cities founded by Nimrod. In the land of Shinar Summer, ancient Babylon, Babel is mentioned alongside Erech of Accad. According to Babylonian tradition, the city was founded by the god Marduk and later destroyed by Sargon around 2350 BCE, when he took the land to establish his new capital, Accad. The history of the city's construction, including its tall tower, is narrated in Genesis 11-1-11. The name Babel is etymologically explained, based on a root word resembling the Hebrew Babel, meaning confusion or mixing. Thus, Babel became synonymous with the confusion resulting from linguistic differences, seen as part of God's punishment for human arrogance during its construction. As of now, there is no archaeological evidence supporting the existence of the city of Babel before the first dynasty around 1800 BCE. However, Babylonian tradition and a text from Sharkalish Ari tell of a king from Accad, around 20-50 BCE, rebuilding the temple tower Ziggurat in Babel. This information suggests the presence of a sacred city at that location before. Sargon's actions may have reinforced this. The use of baked clay for bricks and asphalt as mortar. Genesis 11-3 has been reported since earlier times, possibly with asphalt floated down the Euphrates River from the city of Hit. By 3000 BCE, the names of gods, their titles, and temples had accumulated, although a list from Nineveh, dating to the 7th century BCE, records over 2,500. Most can be identified as gods from ancient Sumer adopted by Semitic people after the first dynasty of Babylon around 1800 BCE. Thus, the actual number of worshipped gods at any given time was not as extensive. Nimrod's story takes a tragic turn as he marries his own mother, named Semiramis. Let's go back to Genesis 3:15. In this verse, God prophesied that a divine descendant, Messiah, would come from the seed of a woman to crush Satan, restoring his kingdom. This prophecy has been passed down since the time of Adam, Set, Enos, and onward to Nimrod. To claim the Messiah status mentioned in Genesis 3:15, Nimrod marries Semiramis and declares her as the intended descendant of Genesis 3:15. Nimrod refers to Semiramis as his wife and also as his mother. In doing so, Nimrod proclaims himself as God incarnated as a human child and the world's savior. This marks the beginning of idol worship in the world. Nimrod requires his society to worship him as the sun god, and he identifies himself as Baal, in English my God, in Hebrew Elohim. Semiramis is referred to as Balti. As the sun god, Nimrod presents himself as both god and king, establishing a religious system with worship centered around him. Seeing this, Semiramis has different intentions for herself. Not content with being only the mother of God, she desires more. Thus, Semiramis kills Nimrod. After Nimrod's death, Semiramis proclaims herself as the Queen of Heaven and the Mother of God, ruling over Babylon for 41 years. She creates a religious system filled with mysticism and mysteries. The tradition of the Queen of Heaven continues. Even after Semiramis's death, and occult practices persist to this day. As evidence, let's examine the following parallels. In Babylon, Semiramis corresponds to Nimrod. In Canaan, Ashtoreth corresponds to Baal. In Egypt, Isis corresponds to Osiris. In Greece, Aphrodite corresponds to Apollo. In India, Devaki corresponds to Krishna. And Isi corresponds to Iswara. In Rome, Fortuna corresponds to Jupiter. In Ephesus, Diana. In China, Xingmu. A few years after Nimrod's death, Semiramis becomes pregnant and gives birth, naming her child Tammuz. The biological father of Tammuz is unknown, and Semiramis claims that Tammuz is the reincarnation of Nimrod. Worship of Semiramis as the Queen of Heaven is opposed by God. See Jeremiah 7:16-20, Jeremiah 40:218. From Nimrod and Semiramis arose the practices of occultism and idol worship. This occurred because the cities built by Nimrod, such as Babel, Erech, and Accad, were advanced for their time. This tradition continued to spread to the land of Canaan, known as the goddess Asherah. She bore a divine child, later worshipped by the Canaanites as Baal. The mother and child figure worshipped mirrors the similarities in the worship of Nimrod and Semiramis. The grandeur of Nimrod's era and his achievements led to it being termed the Golden Age, as only the throne name of Sargon is known. It's possible he had other names. Some suggest Nimrod's bold actions are connected to Naram-Sinov, Accad, Tukulti-Ninurta I of Assyria, or early gods like Ninurta-Nimurta, the war god of Babylon and Assyria, and the hunter, or Amaru II, the name in Samaria for the god Marduk. If Nimrod was a central figure of sin in his time, initiating idol worship, then in Nimrod's era, there was also a figure named Eber who followed in the faith of Noah. Eber enjoyed the longest lifespan among direct descendants of Shem born after the flood, but after the generation of Peleg, Eber's son, a specific phenomenon occurred, a drastic reduction in human lifespans to around 200 years. Directly related to sin, Proverbs 10:27, Eber's long life was a result of distancing himself entirely from sin and wrongdoing and maintaining faith during the apostate movement of building the Tower of Babel. In contrast, the shortened lives of Eber's descendants were a curse resulting from not following their ancestors across the river, but mingling with the descendants of Ham, and participating in the construction of the Tower of Babel, partaking in Nimrod's wickedness. Eber crossed the Euphrates River and built the kingdom of Ebla. Eber lived during the period of the Tower of Babel construction when many turned away from God. The words Eber and Hebrew originate from the same root. This is where the origin of the designation Hebrew for Abraham and his descendants lies. As they follow the faith of their ancestors, namely Eber, this fact serves as evidence that the Hebrew people are descendants of Eber. Abraham, the father of the Hebrew nation, crossed the Euphrates River following the path of Eber's faith to separate himself from the land of sin and wrongdoing.
And there came one that had escaped, and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Anah. And these were confederate with Abram. Genesis 14:13.